they, them pronouns. I am a poet, an educator, cultural curator from Richmond, California. I'm Bay Area based. I am one of the founders of Rich Oak Events. It is an events production program that puts on the Berkeley Poetry Slam, the Oakland Poetry Slam, and the Alchemy Open Mic. So we have 7 writing workshops every month, 7 poetry events with 5 poetry slams and 2 open mics every month, all virtual. So you can feel free to tap in with me for more information on how you can get involved, because we do definitely want to expand our reach and our audience. And I've always loved the Humboldt community. You can talk to Dylan. Probably one of my favorite places to feature is Word Humboldt. But yeah, today we are going to be talking about Ernest Hemingway, specifically in the context of race, and his writings and attitudes towards Black people and people of African descent. But let me share my screen first because I have like a little PowerPoint. So yeah, let's see, continue. So yeah, before we go forward, we have to have some sort of group agreements in order to, you know, protect the space and each other. Some preliminary agreements. First, respect is expected. We are going to be talking about some sensitive things. And I just want us to set the intention now that we are going to be having this conversation respectfully. And then next is one mic. I know it's kind of hard with Zoom, but try to keep it to one person talking at a time. Just, it makes it easier for me to understand what people are saying. And then next, be brave. We're going to be having a difficult conversation. I'm telling you now, this was a difficult workshop for me to put together, just doing the research and gathering the information that's going to be shared today. So I encourage people to be brave, but also take care of yourselves. If you need to step out the room, turn off your camera, mute the whole thing, I encourage you to do so. Do whatever you need to do to feel safe. And in that, remember to step up and step back. That's part of being brave, is knowing when you should take up space and speak your mind and when you should let other people to speak. And then speaking of speech, this is a freedom of speech zone. I want to encourage people to be brave and say it. If you don't have the words to say it pretty, say it ugly. Because that's where learning comes from, is when we're able to have open and honest communication. However, freedom of speech does not equal freedom from the consequences of your speech. Like I said, respect is expected. So, you know, no hate speech, things like that. And then, of course, I do have a disclaimer. We are going to be interacting with anti-Black slurs in Hemingway's writing. And I just want to impress that the fact that we are discussing these slurs does not give you the right to repeat these slurs if you're not Black. And that includes the N-word. We do have euphemisms and ways to discuss these words, these terms, and these attitudes without repeating and reinforcing the rhetoric behind them. Are there any group agreements that people would like to see added? You can sound off in the comment section or feel free to unmute yourself and speak. I'll give it a couple seconds. Yeah, I don't see anything. So yeah, before we go into like discussing and dissecting Hemingway's work, we first have to discuss who is Hemingway and what do we know about him. So I'm just here, I have just a little blurb about him. He was born in July 21st, 1899, died July 2nd, 1961, and he was an American novelist, short story writer, journalist, and sports enthusiast. So are there any other things that we'd like to add about Hemingway? Any things that we know, any things that we've learned over the last couple weeks, you know, interacting with the different workshops and this amazing documentary that's coming out? Anything people would like to add? Cool. And if there's anything you'd like to add, we can go right. Let's see. There's somebody in the comment section. Someone says complicated. Yes. Ernest Hemingway. Very complex, very complicated and marred, very mixed legacy that he has. So thank you for adding that. But yeah, I think one thing we're going to be talking a lot about today is iceberg theory and what that means in connection to the racism that is displayed in his books, in his short stories and his writings and his plays and things. So has anyone heard of iceberg theory? You can just feel free to like raise your hand, sound off in the comment section. I see a few people. Yeah, so I see a few people raising their hands. So yeah, iceberg theory is a theory that describes specifically the minimalism that Hemingway displayed in his work. So what iceberg theory is this minimalistic style that focuses on surface elements without explicitly discussing underlying themes. And so it's important to note this because what this means about his writing is that the details that he includes are the details that he feels important. And what does that mean in context to the details that he provides about race in his writing? So that is something that we definitely want to keep in mind. And I'll be bringing this back up a lot. I do mean a lot. But yeah, I think, let's see. I guess now we can start looking at some of the things that Hemingway has said, because I think that is the only way I can't accurately describe how insidious it can be. So this is an excerpt from the short story, A Canary for One. And this is a small excerpt. If you look at the entire text, it's about 2 pages, and this is just one paragraph, and this is the only mention of any Black characters in this short story. And so it reads, on the station platform were Negro soldiers. They wore brown uniforms and were tall, and their faces shone close under the electric light. Their faces were very Black, and they were too tall to stare. The train left Avignon Station with the Negro standing there. A short white sergeant was with them. So what immediately jumps out for folks about the descriptions? And we can sound off in the comment section, or feel free to unmute yourself and speak as well. It's kind of lonely on Zoom when it's all quiet. I think there might be a problem with your sound. It's very, yeah, I'm sorry, Minnie, the sound's not coming in very clear. But somebody in the comment section, wow, I just lost the, here we go. Someone in the comment section said, the implication that people would want to stare. Yeah, that is something that I noticed, is the phrase itself, "they were too tall to stare." And what does that mean? Yeah, Mary said, "I'm reading an emphasis on color." Yes, 2 times they were, not even 2 times, like there are several instances where the color of their skin jumps out, where Negro soldiers, very Black, Negro standing there. I also want to point out the language. The Black soldiers are just soldiers. The white soldier is a sergeant. And with context clues, you can tell that this man is on a train. So my question is, do we think that this narrator was able to determine that this white soldier was a sergeant, or above the Black soldiers in rank? Or do we think that that was an assumption that the narrator made? Yeah, the train left him behind. The leader was white. Maybe a question we can ask ourselves is, why do we think that the train left them behind? Was it their train, or was there something more insidious at work? And that's just a subtle display of Hemingway's attitudes on race. It's just a small description, very minimal, almost like an afterthought, like, oh, there was like, we were at a train station and there were some Black soldiers, and they were very Black and they were very tall. And then Heidi said something that's interesting, because Heidi noticed that there is a contrast between the tall Black soldiers and the short white sergeant. And just thinking about narration and story building, people's stature in relation to each other, whether it's in like theater or like in writing, is an important way to display power or an imbalance of power. And here, that the person in power is tall, the people who aren't in power are short. That's inverted. So what do we think that means? Yeah, there's a white man in charge, but he's shorter than everybody else. And why do we think that that was a choice for Hemingway to write? Elizabeth said that the narrator records injustice, but maybe doesn't condemn it. Yeah. Or do we think that the narrator even notices this as injustice, or is this just the way things are? There are a lot of implications in this work, and because this is such a small piece of writing and the short story, and because it is such a short description, it is hard to see, it's hard to make a choice one way or the other. But like Dylan said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're about to get a little bit deeper, and definitely a lot more overt. And so specifically, we're going to be looking at a piece from In the Light of the World, particularly a part of the story where there is a sex worker named Peroxide, and she is talking about a boxer that she claims to be in love with, and she claims that he loves her too. And essentially in this part of the story, someone asks her, Didn't Jack Johnson knock him out? And she responds, it was a trick. That big dinge took him by surprise. He just knocked Jack Johnson down, the big black bastard. That nigger beat him by a fluke. Steve knocked him down. He turned to smile at me. I thought you said you weren't on the coast, someone said. I went out just for that fight. Steve turned to smile up at me, and the black son of a bitch from hell jumped him and hit him by surprise. Steve could lick 100 like that black bastard. Yeah, so obviously a lot more overt so far as to even drop a slur. What are some of the first things that we notice about this particular character? I'm just opening. And for context, I do want to point out that Peroxide is lying about being at that fight. She was not there. So what does that say about her and the necessity for her saying that? Just waiting in the comment section. Peroxide is a fake color, so a lie. Yes. Wow, I didn't even notice that. That is like a really good observation. She did use this as a lie. And she did assume that her story would be believed. And I think that that is something that's interesting, is that she has the assumption of veracity here. Nobody else is going to be, nobody questioned her except for the fact that she got caught, that she already said she wasn't there. Yeah, she feels the need to defend her man's stature by claiming he was not beaten fairly and could not be beaten by 100 Black men due to his superiority. That is an important thing to talk about, because this is not, because that's indicative of the way that Peroxide talks about Steve Kershaw. So she continually, and the story as a whole, continually describes the boxer as white, the whitest, the best, things like that. And then when you see, again, one of the only descriptions or the only insertions of a Black character, and you see things like Black bastard, big dinge, Black son of a bitch from hell, it's like, it's very, it might be it's very telling that there is a link between whiteness and inherent superiority. Like, you can't be beaten because you are a white man, and certainly not by a Black man. Elizabeth pointed out her name is literally Peroxide, and she's bleaching the boxer's character, venerating whiteness. Yeah, that's interesting. So my question is, why do we think that that was an important thing to put in this story? And why is this, what does this mean that this is, again, one of the only descriptions of Black characters in this work? So many terrible names based on color, yes. But what do we think this means contextually for Hemingway as an author to include this racist tirade in this manner for this reason, without choosing to describe Black people, Black characters in any other way. And do we think that Blackness only functions to solidify skills, journeys, personhoods of white folks? I actually didn't think about that when I was reading this, and that's actually something that's really important to talk about, because in the context of all of this writing, yes, Black characters only show up to either explain a white character's viewpoint, or to be some sort of carrier of their narrative. So these Black characters, specifically in the two works that we've just discussed, don't get any development outside of what you see here. We don't know any of their motivations. We don't know who they are, what they want to do. And all they serve is to show that Peroxide is a liar. I don't know if he's necessarily trying to say that Peroxide is a racist, and whether or not he's trying to say that's a good or a bad thing. Quite frankly, I wish I could ask him, but the man is dead. So I don't know his reasoning, but I do know the implications that that can have on a reader, on a viewer, where when you have descriptions like this, and you have nothing that says that what was said was wrong, and you have nothing that says that presents a different viewpoint or a different characterization of Black characters, it reinforces stereotypes. If all you see in writing is that Black son of a bitch from hell, you think all Black people are son of bitches from hell. And so what does that say about our need for proper and accurate representation of Black characters? Just a thought. But yeah, these were two descriptions, like short descriptions from short stories. I think next we can look at a few more quotes, and then we'll get into some kind of reflection, writing questions. And someone pointed out he was the write what you know type. So yeah, I think that's something that's really important, is that he was a write what you know. He didn't really write outside of his own point of view. And as well as with Iceberg Theory, he only included the details that seemed important, and left everything else to subtext. So what does that mean that he deems this racist tirade an important part of the story, without doing anything about it? But yeah, there are some other less lengthy descriptions, but still some things that we can pick apart and really talk about. So in The Battler, here are a few descriptions. So these are not like quotes from characters. This is straight from Hemingway, how he decided to describe Black characters. So first is, Nick knew from the way he walked that he was a Negro. And then the next one is, in a low, smooth, polite nigger voice. And then the next one is, crouching on long nigger legs over the fire. And I think, just speaking for myself, what stood out the most about these quotes is the sheer level of turning Black skin almost into a personality trait, which is, it's just, it asks the questions of like, what does walking like a Negro mean? What does having a smooth, polite nigger voice mean? What are long nigger legs? Which are all the questions that I was asking myself when reading these quotes, where what does that mean? What does that mean? Because it does produce almost an animalistic type of like description. Like I would use in my writing, crouching on long spidery legs, or in a low, smooth, polite, I don't know, teddy bear voice, something like that. But the fact that he's inserting race as a defining feature of somebody's voice or somebody's stature or somebody's presentation. What does that mean? Someone says, creates the character as other, different from oneself, as in us versus them. Yes. I think that's one of the things. Exotic, which in the context of a lot of Hemingway's work, because his perception and portrayal of Black characters over the course of his life does move from like active disdain to a more exoticized, like, I just traveled to Africa and found myself kind of vibe. So it assumes the reader has a shared perspective as well, that they would recognize these features as other than his white audience. And yeah, I think that's really important to talk about, is the othering. There is a theory, I forget the name of it, I forget who came up with it. I've just been watching way too many YouTube videos about like strange situations, but they talk about how, it's a theory that talks about how when describing how serious othering can be, that when you describe something as exotic and like far away, distant, alien, it becomes easier to enact violence against them. Because in a sense of like, when you create survival, or like when you create survival and a need for survival, or a situation where it's hard to survive, aka capitalism. When you're in a capitalist structure and you have to pick and choose who gets rights, who gets food, water, access to resources, it is easiest first to give resources and help and aid to people that you recognize. So it goes family, then friends, then neighbors, then people from your city, then people from your, like, who share your identity, and then it becomes harder and harder and harder to kind of spread out aid, resources. So by othering people, you actually start creating the conditions for people to be barred from resources that the familiar would be getting. So think about, like, when your friend invites somebody you don't know to your little friend date, there's a little bit of animosity there. And then when you see that in the context of race, when you start painting Black people as they don't belong to the main group, it is easier to say, well, they don't get the rights that the main group has. You don't, exactly, someone brought up exoticism in connection to the Asian American Pacific Islander community and the violence that they have been experiencing. And that's a clear example of where the exoticism, the Orientalism makes it easier to enact violence, because it is easier to it is easier to enact violence against somebody that you don't recognize as yourself, or as part of your group and your family and what is familiar to you. It is easier to say, well, you know, I don't recognize them, so they don't deserve what I have. And then you couple that with all the negative stereotypes, other negative stereotypes that are with Asian American Pacific Islander communities, and it is a dumpster fire of violence and racism. And yeah, othering separates the person from the personhood, and it decides who gets to be included in what we call personhood. So that is a very, very good observations. And then next we have some quotes from To Have and Have Not. And so Morgan said nothing then because he liked the nigger, and there was nothing to do now but hit him, and he couldn't hit him. And then the second quote is, he's a real Black nigger, smart and gloomy, with blue voodoo beads around his neck under his shirt and an old straw hat. What he liked to do on board was sleep and read the papers. So contrary to popular, what this entails, or what this implies, this is describing a character that is described as favorable and likable. I mean, even here it says, because he liked the nigger, but even there's just such negative descriptions. And what are some things that pop out about these descriptions? Okay, and let's see, in the voodoo beads, yeah, the voodoo beads dropped out. Thinking about just the implications of voodoo, and what that means in a Eurocentric, largely Judeo-Christian culture, and the implications of voodoo in connection with the Black community, as one of the ways that we have taken the African spiritualities that we were forced to abandon due to slavery. Voodoo itself is canonized with Catholicism. So thinking about what it means to have a religion that is essentially a Catholic practice, but its connections to African spirituality make it negative. So some people have pointed out the old straw hat implies poverty. Yeah, it does imply poverty. There's an implied laziness. The fact that the beads have to be hidden, like there's something dangerous about him. The assumption he could hit the guy and obviously face no consequences, except that's something to point out, because here in the first one, the dilemma is not a legal dilemma. It's a moral, not even a moral dilemma. It's an emotional dilemma of, I like this dude, but like normally I would just hit somebody like him for doing that. And then implying this was what is real, generalizing what it means to be a real Black man. Yeah, so what does it mean when we use words like a real Black nigger, and then go on to describe what he looks like and what he acts? Like, can we say that that is a generalization? Quite not troublemaking, exotic, but likable because he's non-threatening to Morgan's whiteness due to playing the role of the perceived right type of Black man, he is used as a prop. Yeah, it's also like really important to note that this takes place on I believe, a fishing boat, oyster fishing, I believe. I can't um, quite remember, but Morgan has a position of power over this Black man. Um, and it's very, a fishing boat in Key West. Okay, yes, I was right. I've been reading a lot of Hemingway lately. It's been hard to kind of keep the settings and characters straight. But yeah, it's really important that there is a power imbalance here already. And what does that mean when there's the social power imbalance of just because Morgan is a white man and this character is a Black man, he can slug him and not something happen. And then add in the fact that this man works for him. And so what does that mean to like, where have we seen situations in which Black people are working for white people and have violence enacted against them in a workplace? I mean, if you can call slavery a workplace, but it's very indicative of the same dynamics of slavery, except in this case, the Black man didn't get beat. And then Susanna said that, in fact, it seems like he would get in trouble for liking him and not hitting him. Yeah. Yeah. That's just something important to notice of like the way violence is almost carried as an expectation, that this is what he's supposed to be doing. And that what he was used to doing, and now he's faced with this dilemma of like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm used to doing, this is what I'm usually fine with doing, but like not this specific person. And what does that mean, to like somebody as a person, but not like their entire ethnic group? And to be violent towards that entire ethnic group. So that's all very good observations that about this piece. Let's see, one more. And then let me just check my lesson plan. Cool. It makes Morgan more interesting. Yeah. It's almost like that gives a little bit of complexity, like, to Morgan's character. Like was said earlier, it's a vehicle for his character development, and not necessarily it's like not necessarily giving this Black character his own story. He only exists in the context of the white man that he's working for. But yeah, let's see. So we have some reflection questions. This is the space where you can write if you haven't been writing already. But I guess we can now take some time to just kind of reflect with ourselves. You can sound off in the comment section to answer any of these questions. Write this down, write your answers down in a notebook, write a poem, write an essay, whatever calls out to you. I kind of purposefully didn't design this as a writing heavy workshop because I wanted to give enough time to discuss and have like that deep discussion of these texts. But yeah, so our reflection questions, what does it mean to you that Ernest Hemingway was such a prolific American writer? And do you think it's possible to separate the art from the artist? Why or why not? What does his position in the American literary canon say about academia's relationship to racism and white supremacy? Another question another way to phrase that question of what does it mean that academia is so willing to look over his racism to uplift his technique? Um, who do we hold accountable for his influence? And can we hold someone accountable for his influence? What does accountability even look like for a dead man? All of those questions. And then finally, what responsibilities do we have as carriers of the culture? And how do we honor the complex legacies of writers like Hemingway, both the good and the bad? Because to say that Hemingway never added anything to the American literary world, the way we write what is perceived as good and acceptable, would be straight up wrong. But to also ignore what he was saying and the racial implications of what he was saying, and the not just on race but sexuality, masculinity, women, and it's not just Hemingway but other writers. How do we honor their contributions and their shortcomings? So those are the reflection questions. I'm going to give a few moments for people to gather their thoughts, and then we can, if people feel comfortable, you can share your answers in the comment section or out loud, either way. But I'm going to give y'all space to kind of think. Okay, and if you have any thoughts now, feel free to share them in the comment section. Speak out loud. Y'all have had very, very insightful comments. Someone said, it's an age-old question. If the artist reflects the society around him honestly, how much is simply reflection and how much has the artist influence and shaped the society around him? Wow, yeah, I feel that all of these questions reflect the fact that the US was founded by a certain group of people, and for over 300 years, the white Judeo-Christian voice has been
Hi, I'm just gonna talk because my typing is so terrible.
It's all good.
Keeps changing when I'm writing. I think it's been 300 years and there's been the certain group that's been in charge, and we've had to listen to their point of view, which is like why he is the prolific American writer, why he's such a prominent place in the canon. And now that hopefully we're coming to realize there are more diverse perspectives and people are becoming able to share more stories, and now that is enabling us to see the limits of our dogma, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really something that is important. And another question I'd like to maybe, since we're kind of running out of time, maybe not answer it, but a question we should reflect on is, do we think that at the time Ernest Hemingway was writing and being published, that there were writers with different backgrounds and different points of view doing the same thing, but that got overlooked. Because I think, yeah, because I think one of the things that is very apparent in all art forms is when we ask, you know, where are the Black people, where are the women, where are the queer folks? It's always like, we can't find them. You know, it's hard to find people that are qualified enough from these marginalized communities. But like, at the end of the day, if we have um, these people, these white men in power, eh, they get to determine what is rigorous, what is acceptable. So how much of our societal conditioning is even affecting who we view? Are the standards for Black, brown, indigenous, female, queer writers the same for white male writers? Somebody said, I think Hemingway being considered a prolific American writer has multiple implications. It suggests that the white male perspective is prolifically American. Oof. It also suggests that his racism is normalized in America, that it is so deeply embedded in the culture that a white male is expected to have a racist perspective. Yes, that he is reflecting the mainstream American point of view. Those are really good observations. White America bought his books, enabled him, old, white, rich, influential men telling us what to value. Also, as a reporter, he held up a mirror to white America, reflecting back the flaws. And then someone said, I think holding him accountable means looking at his work with a critical sense and analyzing how the culture of white superiority is reflected in his writing and the damage that his perspective does to all Americans. And then someone said, can hold up his writing as one example of racism in the context of his time. Moving forward for change to recognize institutional racism in academia, we can start offering more diverse writings. Yeah, that's something that we should point out, is that the diverse writers are often shoved into an ethnic studies class or a women's studies class or a gender studies class or a sexuality studies class. And so part of us undoing the damage that to be quite honest, the white supremacy of academia has instilled is decentering the single voice that has been on a platform for hundreds and hundreds of years, and making room for more diverse voices, not just to be included, but to be included in the mainstream. Yes, maybe even comparing his writing and perspective with his diverse contemporary writers. That is also something I don't see. That should be just done with everybody. Like, how we should compare these older writers to contemporary writers. And that's just responsible teaching. And the fact that we're not doing this, especially in the context of writers whose viewpoints would not be necessarily acceptable today, depending on where you are and who you are, because quite frankly, a lot of his writing would still be considered and is still considered acceptable today. But even comparing it to contemporary writers that are using these same tools of minimalism, Iceberg Theory, of the way that Hemingway paints pictures with his language, and the very specific and targeted imagery that he uses. But there are contemporary writers and even historical writers that did that in a more responsible way. So yeah, I think we are at time. And then, oh, there's a couple other comments. Final question. Our responsibility is to acknowledge the bad, discuss why it is bad and the negative influence it has on our society. We can honor the complex legacies of writers by having workshops similar to this one. Oh, yes, I think I really like this space and the conversation that we were able to have about this writer. And I do hope that this opens the door to facilitate more conversations. with that. And then let's see, I feel like a lot of people don't even really know his work, they know his name. Yeah, that, very honest, I knew who Hemingway was, and like I had been forced to read, in quotation marks, his reading in like high school, but like kind of skipped over it. It wasn't until college that I really sat down and interacted with his work in a way that was very thorough. So I think that a lot of people just like skip over Hemingway and say, "Oh, he's one of the American greats," and keep it pushing, because quite honestly, this country doesn't read nearly enough. And it is very easy to get summaries and the gist of a story without having to read it. And so I think that is a very important thing to know, is that a lot of people haven't actually interacted with his work. And what does that mean in the context of our school system when people are just told, oh, this is an American writer, and then nothing is like goes further into it, and all of these American writers look the same and sound the same. So yeah, thank you. I think that is all I have for today. I want to thank everybody here for being here and participating in this conversation. It was very lovely. I am so what's the word? I have so much gratitude to everybody for your words, your thoughts, and participation. It was very insightful and a very productive conversation. I really like all of the ideas and the analysis that happened. But yeah, you can check me out and my work. You can, mostly on social media, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Reggie Poetry. Thank you again to Humboldt Library, KEET-TV, Word Humboldt, for this amazing opportunity. Yeah, I guess, are there any final thoughts, any final things people want to say?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Reggie, for doing this. It was really great. And thank you everybody for joining us, especially on a, late on a Thursday night. Well, not late, but you know what I mean. And yeah, so we'll be putting this on YouTube. So if you want to check it out again or share it, you can do it that way. And next week, same time on Thursday, we're going to have a open poetry reading with Word Humboldt. So if you have work that you've been working on based on the series or just your own, it's a chance to share it with other people. So join us for that. And unless anybody has any other questions, I'll go ahead and let you go for the night.
And next week, it doesn't have to be poetry. If you have a short story, anything like that, or any type of spoken word, it's open for all that, not just poetry.
Yeah. So yeah, bring your written work and share it with other writers and lovers of the written word. So on that note, I'll go ahead and say good night to everybody and hopefully see you next week.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Reggie.
That was awesome, man.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good job.
Wow.